Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
Only a fool could confuse the devil and the horned god. I've heard those words countless times from the witches of my village. Normally, they were said in the context of rebuking the church's attempts to demonize our village's pagan practices. But tonight, they held a different meaning altogether. Before me, in light of the full moon in the freshly fallen snow, I saw 2 sets of hoofprints leading off into the sacred woods where I was to find our village's Yule tree. Those woods were under the protection of spirits who served the great goddess and horned god, and to fell any live tree without their blessing was to incur their wrath. One of the sets of hoofprints before me had been laid by the horned god himself to lead us to the Yule tree he had blessed for us to help ensure that we survived the winter and had a bountiful spring. The devil had left the other, and they would, at best, lead me to death, and, at worst, lead me to the wrong tree and trick me into profaning the sacred woods, causing our gods to forsake us for a year and a day. Does the devil really have nothing better to do? I muttered with a sad shake of my head, the wooden sled slung across my back, suddenly feeling a little heavier. Doing my best to focus, I recalled everything I could that the witches had taught me about the horned god and the devil. They were adamant that they didn't worship the devil, no matter how fervently the church said otherwise. The witches worshipped the triple goddess and the horned god, both deities of life and nature. The horned god, in particular, is the god of the wilderness, the hunt, sacrifice, and resurrection. Each year at Samhain, he dies to ensure his goddess's realm will remain safe and fruitful, descending with the maiden goddess Persephone so that she might take her rightful place by her husband's side as the queen of the underworld. On the longest night of the year, the maiden grants her father a grace so that he may be reborn in the Summerland, so that the days may lengthen once more. That was the god our village worshipped. He was not evil, but rather the epitome of what a man should be, to protect and provide for his loved ones, even at the cost of his own life, an embodiment of the cycles of nature, how life cannot flourish without sacrifice, without death. In some ways, his daughter was more like the devil than he was, preferring to rule in hell than to serve in heaven. Not that the underworld was hell, as the church understood it, nor was Hades the devil they so feared. Souls were not sentenced to the underworld, but drawn down to it by the weight of their own sins, just as earthly matter is held down by gravity. It is far from a pleasant place, but neither cold Hades nor dread Persephone are there to torture them. Indeed, nearly all hope that exists in that gloomy realm comes from them. It was not always clear to the witches whom the church was even referring to when they spoke of the devil. On occasion, it seemed they were, in fact, speaking of the horned god, but at other times it appeared they spoke of his antithesis, Moloch, an ancient and powerful demon of uncontested brute strength, which he has no compunction against using to subjugate or mutilate others. He desires only dominion and suffering, and gnaws forever at the taproots of the world tree where he is imprisoned, hoping he will one day destroy all creation. But most often, the church seemed to be speaking of a glorified trickster god whom the witches could not quite place in their pantheon. Though he purported to be the second most powerful being in creation, he was largely hamstrung in using this power, lest he rouse the one being mightier than he from their usual deistic apathy. Thus, he mostly had to rely on cunning and subterfuge to achieve his goals, and seemed to enjoy doing so immensely. And here he was tonight, trying to stop me from getting a Yule tree. I briefly studied the two sets of hoofprints, but quickly deduced that they were identical in shape and depth. The horned god and the other elderkin had forms that reflected their true identities and nature. As a god of the wild, Cernunnos walked upright like a man, but on the legs of a stag, with a great rack of antlers sprouting from his head. On the other hand, the devil was not so limited and could take on any form he pleased. He was the goat-headed Baphomet when it suited his purposes, a man of wealth and taste at others. The physical dimensions of the hoofprints meant nothing in that case. Instead, I remembered what the witches had told me, focusing on how the moonlight fell upon each set of tracks. The moon was of the great goddess, and her light would reveal which tracks belonged to her consort. In the tracks to my left, the moonlight reflected off the snow with an exaggerated luminance, almost as if they had been sprinkled in diamond dust. The tracks to my right were the opposite, dark and dull as if the moon itself was trying not to shine on them. They also, I noticed, carried a subtle but distinct smell of brimstone with them. That was enough for me to make up my mind. I followed the set of tracks to my left, matching their stride as closely as I could. This was not only to ensure that I didn't lose them, but also because it was supposed to offer me some level of protection against the spirits that dwelt within the woods. I had no doubt that the devil was still somewhere in those woods too, and he wasn't about to give up just because I didn't fall for his first and easiest trick. The winter lack of foliage meant that the forest was not so impenetrably black at night as it otherwise would have been, but the bare branches still obscured much of the moon's blessed light. Every crunching footstep in the snow, every snapped twig or cracked branch seemed amplified 100-fold in the unnatural silence, and the skeletal shadows of the trees robbed the place of any sense of holiness. I took great care to never stray from the trail of hoofprints, no matter how bad my visibility got, as getting lost now could prove a fatal mistake. Fortunately, the strides between hoofprints were fairly consistent, so whenever I wandered under a thicket of branches dense enough to shadow the forest floor completely, I could easily match my stride so that I did not stray out of sight when I returned to the moonlight. It was only when I had strolled into a moonlit glade that I first heard the sound of another creature in those sacred woods. The sound of footsteps in the snow came up behind me at a measured and confident pace. It was no beast, for I was sure it was walking on two legs, and both its pace and lack of stealth suggested some woodland predator was not stalking me. Gripping my axe firmly between my hands, I slowly turned around to see what was following me. The devil was standing at the edge of the glade, in both my footprints and those of the horned god. Tonight, he had taken on his Baphomet form, wearing a huge crimson goat's head atop a body shrouded in a scarlet cloak. The goat's great horns, long ears, and pointy beard were all positioned to form an inverted pentagram, and the gleam from his golden eyes created a halo around his head to make it an inverted pentacle. He was taller than I was, even though he was stooped as if by age, leaning on a great wooden staff for support.
Nice night for a walk,
he commented casually, as though we were but two ordinary men who had happened to cross one another on a hike. When he spoke, it was not mist but smoke that he exuded from his nostrils, a sign of the great infernal heat inside him that could not be quelled by any winter. I looked down in despair at the tracks where the devil now stood, realizing that I could no longer trust them to lead me back out. "You dare to despoil the omens left by another god?" I demanded. While I made no attempt to hide the anger or frustration in my voice, I let my axe fall to my side, knowing there was no point in threatening him.
"I'm the daring sort,"
he retorted.
"but these woods are not meant for mortals, omens or no. So I would say that your presence here is far more daring than mine. Wouldn't you?"
You're correct that these winter woods belong as much to the Summerland as they do to the living earth, and are thus not meant for the living, or the damned, I replied confidently.
"Well, if neither of us is welcomed here, then we should leave together, eh? I'll keep you warm, and you keep me company. We'll double our chances of making it out unscathed,"
he offered. "I know what it is you seek, Baphomet. You wish to make my village your followers to cement the church's view that we are heretics, and so further discord between us," I accused vehemently, spittle flying from my mouth that froze before it hit the ground.
"Me? Cause trouble? Never,"
he said with a sly grin.
"I'm trying to save you trouble. You're here to find a Yule tree, are you not? Chopping it down and dragging it back on your own is hassle enough, and yet here you risk offending the gods themselves if you fell the wrong one, through no fault of your own, I might add. If you ask me, your gods are every bit as capricious and unreasonable as the delirious dreaming demiurge the church serves. Do you not weary of their mysterious, ineffable ways and fickle tempers? As you may well have heard, I prefer contracts with clearly stated terms. Do you want to break your back and risk your life for a mere token of your god's goodwill, which they may or may not choose to honor? Come, stand by my side and keep warm. We'll share drinks by the fire at the tavern and work out a contract where our obligations are as clear as day. I can do everything your gods do for you and more. And I'm sure we can agree on something you can give in exchange that would make it worth my while."
"If you do not mean me harm, then why did you not make this offer immediately instead of trying to lead me astray with your hoofprints?" I demanded.
I'm sure I don't know what you're referring to. I only just came upon you now, and if you came across any footprints I might have left earlier, that was sheer coincidence,"
he insisted. As the moon moved across the sky, I saw him take a small step back into the shifting shadows to avoid its light. "You claim to be more powerful than the great goddess, and yet you cannot even endure the light of her moon," I scoffed.
"Moonlight is so cold. I prefer warmer forms of illumination,"
he replied, snorting a puff of flame out of his nostrils that was instantly snuffed out when the light of the moon touched it. "Be gone, Baphomet. You've wasted enough of my time," I said as I turned my back to him, confident that he would not pursue me through the moonlight. "I've got a Yule tree to find."
"Oh, you'll find it. I do not doubt that,"
I heard him shout as I marched along the trail of hoofprints.
"But you'll never find your way back without my help."
He was lying. Going back the same way I had come in would have been ideal, but the sky was clear and the moon was full. So long as I knew where the moon was in the sky, every shadow was a compass. The deeper I trekked into those woods, however, the shadows became fainter and fewer. Everything from the snow to the trees seemed to be absorbing and radiating the hallowed moonlight until everything was bathed in ambient light that cast no shadows at all. Since I no longer needed to fear losing the horned god's footprints in this unnaturally bright light, I forewent their protection and dared to walk just beside them so that I might leave my own distinct footprints to follow out. This was a riskier choice than I first realized, for I soon found myself surrounded by spectral satyrs that I'd failed to notice until they were almost right in front of me. Though it is perhaps more likely that I didn't so much fail to notice them as I could not see them until they allowed for it. These were servants of the horned god, humanoid with goat or deer-like attributes, but none possessing a fully inhuman head as Baphomet had. They possessed no physical form and were made only of soft, incorporeal luminescence that left no trace in the snow. Several of them hid warily behind the trees nearest to me, but one of them knelt directly in my path, staring at the hoofprints with somber reverence.
"He's still following you."
The satyr bleated, nodding his head behind me. I looked over my shoulder and saw Baphomet in the distance. He had drawn his hood over his head as some protection against the now ever-present moonlight.
"He's not welcome here. He would burn this whole wood to ash out of malice if he could. Always he seeks to sow discord between spirits and mortals to keep our planes separate. He hates your kind, you know. He's outraged that souls born of flesh should be counted among the blessed or the damned. He'll offer you worldly boons or physical safety, only so that you may more easily scorn blessings of spirit, and always at a cost that will earn you the ire of the gods."
"I'm sorry I brought him here," I apologized, shivering as much from the cold as from the thought of having profaned such a sacred site, however unintentional. "But I've come only to claim that which the horned god has offered us. Our village will not be safe without his protection."
"So you care more for the welfare of your village than you do for the sanctity of these woods? The witches chose poorly when they sent you in here then, and Baphomet chose well when he decided to follow you."
The satyr accused me, his fellow fawns hissing at me in disdain from behind the trees.
"I will not forbid you to go further, even if I had the right to do so. The Yule tree already belongs to your village, and a gift given cannot be rescinded. But I ask you to stop here and think before going any further. If the devil is still following you, are you willing to risk leading him where you're going?"
I am not leading the devil anywhere. He is merely following the same hoofprints that I am, and would be able to do so just as easily were I not here, I argued. Should he choose to profane these woods further beyond his mere presence, my turning back empty-handed would do nothing to abate that. Nothing. I will have offended the horned god by refusing his gift, bringing a year and a day of misfortune upon my village. Spirit, if I had to choose, beyond all doubt, between saving this forest or my village, I would choose this forest. But as it stands, I can only see my sacrifice being for naught, and I will not betray my village because I happen to be stalked by the devil against my will. Please allow me to complete my task. The devil and I will be out of your woods all the sooner."
"Very well then,"
the satyr said with a succinct nod, moving out of my path and gesturing to the hoofprints that remained before me.
"But stay on your guard. Old Bahamut has not endured the moonlight this long, only to give up now."
I nodded gratefully and continued on my way, still feeling the scornful glares of the other satyrs as I insisted on defiling their sacred woods even more than I had already dared.
Not a very welcoming bunch, are they?
Baphomet asked, appearing behind me the instant I was out of the satyr's sight. "I imagine they're more hospitable when the Prince of Hell isn't trespassing through their woods at his leisure," I retorted.
Well, if this is the welcome they give a prince, imagine how poorly they treat the rest of the riffraff.
He mocked.
I must say, this gift you're so intent on retrieving seems to be a bit of a white elephant. It involves a rather substantial amount of work and risk to reap the benefits. Do you agree? You're clearly freezing, and if you so much as nick the wrong tree with your axe, you'll incur the wrath of your gods upon not only yourself, but the rest of your village, whose only sin was trusting you. The satyrs themselves have implored you to abandon this foolish quest for a Yule tree. You're putting everyone in needless danger. I must implore you as well. Please, for the sake of all involved, not least of all yourself, come back with me to the tavern. Fire, ale, a supper and singing, and let us work out a contract. It's not as if I'm asking you to sell your soul of firstborn for a Yule tree. I'll give you the cheapest one I have for some ice water. Something you have in abundance this time of year, but is always in high demand where I come from.
I'll give you some yellow snow if you'll leave me be, I snarled at him. He snorted some more fire, apparently quite offended by my audacity. But I knew he wouldn't dare to spill blood in these woods. I pushed onwards through the deepening snow and plunging temperatures for a few moments more, before I finally came upon the grove of sacred evergreens at the heart of the woods. Droplets of frozen starlight twinkled upon their snow-laden branches, with sparkling silver pine cones dangling and spinning in the chilly air. Their needles were as close to being blue as green could be, and all as short and soft as fresh buds. Strands of iridescent, imperishable spider silk encircled them from top to bottom, and strange dream catchers woven by the satyrs had capped their crowns.
Pre-decorated. How convenient,
Baphomet commented with a mocking nod of approval.
Though it does look like a herd of deer trampled through here not too long ago. Hopefully it hasn't muddled those hoofprints you were following too badly.
Prying my eyes away from the wondrous sight of the Yule trees, I looked down upon the ground to see that it was covered nearly completely with criss-crossing hoofprints. Deer? I asked incredulously. Those are goat tracks. Moreover, they're tracks from a single goat, one with a penchant for walking on its hind legs at that.
Most peculiar,
Baphomet softly bleated, nodding as though he were deeply pondering this mystery. Shaking my head in disgust, I set off through the grove to find my Yule tree.
Where are you going?
Baphomet demanded.
You can't tell which tracks are which now, surely.
I've been walking in my god's hoofprints all night, devil. You could gouge my eyes out right now, and I would still be able to feel when I strayed from his path, I boasted. And it was a boast. I was not certain that the feeling of hallowedness I got from standing in those hoofprints was not all in my head. But since they were now too trampled to tell apart from the devil's, it was all I had to go on. Only a fool could confuse the devil with the horned god, and I would soon find out if I was a fool.
Folly!
Baphomet accused as he stomped after me.
Tracking hoofprints was one thing, but now you're going to gamble your village's future on blind faith? There are over 100 trees in this grove. Pick wrong, and your gods will forsake you. I'm offering you guaranteed salvation in exchange for ice shavings. You are betraying your village, or dooming them to death and despair by rejecting me.
I didn't humor him with any response. I followed the trail as faithfully as possible until I was standing before the tree intended for me to fall. Kneeling on one knee and leaning upon my axe, I first laid out a small seedling to the satyrs in exchange for the life I would take, and recited a prayer of gratitude before I began to chop. Blessed be the moon goddess and the horned god for their watchful benevolence. Blessed be my feet that walk in the path of the Lord and Lady. Blessed be my knees that kneel at their altar of nature. Blessed be my eyes that see the path of spirit. Blessed be my bones that may endure the chill of winter. Blessed be my heart to resist wicked men and spirits that may malign my path. Blessed be my village for a year and a day by the grace of the horned God. May the love of the Lord and Lady forever surround and guide us. So mote it be. I bowed down, touching my forehead to the snow, before standing up again and raising my axe high. But before I could swing, its weight suddenly became so great that I could no longer hold it upright, dragging me down to the ground.
Fool!
Baphomet shouted, his voice dropping in pitch as it raised in volume, taking on the timbre of preternatural rage. A shroud of smoke grew around him to protect him from the moonlight, a fire within him growing ever brighter as he slowly increased in size.
If I cannot make you see sense through words, then perhaps a vision of things yet to be is in order.
In a dream, I saw the entire sacred woods burning, the smoke so thick it was impossible to tell if it was night or day, and my village was burning with it. I saw our witches bound to stakes, surrounded by kindling waiting to be lit. Some surviving villagers, seemingly the least able or least willing to fight back, were knelt down on their knees with their hands tied behind their backs, forced to watch the execution. Fanatical knights, clad in shining plate armor that reflected the blaze around them, stood in a menacing vigil as they rested their hands on their hilts, ready to draw their swords again should the need arise. A cloaked inquisitor stood before the crowd, ranting and pontificating about how the witches were the brides of Satan and were an evil that must be purged from the world, then angrily throwing his torch onto the kindling.
You cannot stop this,
Baphomet said to me as I heard the witches' agonizing screams as they were engulfed in flames.
Your gods cannot stop this. The church is too entrenched, too powerful. They decide what counts as heresy and what is to be done with heretics. You will convert or burn, but either way, your village will be no more. Ironically, the only way to protect yourself from the church is to embrace me. I will do more than give you bountiful harvests and ward off misfortune. I will bring woe upon any who would bring misfortune upon you. You will have no need to fear hellfire, when hellfire is what will protect you from the tortures of your adversaries. The inferno which engulfs the forest you hold so sacred will instead devour their rat-infested cities. All who oppose us shall be rendered too destitute to raise their armies, too wizened from famine to raise a sword to fight, too wasted from plague to charge into battle. Their suffering will be such that even the most devout will be forced to accept that their God has forsaken them. The faith that fuels their fervor will be extinguished, and you will have no enemies to fear. Leave that axe where it lies. Forget these garish and inept totems and invite me into your village to discuss a contract. Only under my protection will you have any hope of remaining.
I threw a snowball right in his face, and that put an end to his lobbying pretty quickly. He screeched in misery as the refracted moonlight in the snow scorched him ferociously, dropping him to his knees as he frantically tried to swat the offending substance off. "I wish no harm upon anyone, devil," I rebuked him, rising to my feet and picking up my axe again. "If you can only protect us from suffering by bringing suffering down upon others, then we will have none of it. And ye harm is none of our rede, devil. And you, it seems, would harm many. That is why we will never serve you." Wasting no more time in berating him, I swung my axe into the tree trunk. I waited a moment for any sign that I had chosen wrong and had committed some great blasphemy, but no such sign came. I chopped quickly then, felling it to the ground in short order. By the time I was binding it and loading it onto my sled, the devil had mostly recovered from his injury and was back on his feet, glaring at me with a cold and quiet loathing. "Plenty more snowballs where that one came from," I warned him.
"Well, it seems like I've lost a sale."
He conceded at last, taking a slight bow as he turned to leave.
"Perhaps I'll call again come midsummer. You'll need music, and I'm awfully fond of the fiddle."
And with that, he vanished into the dark, along with all his hoofprints. The only tracks left were those of the horned gods and my own. Sighing with relief, knowing that my trek back would be easier, I began pulling my sled back home, taking pride in the knowledge that it would be safe and blessed for another year, and that I had beaten the devil in a snowball fight.
The lavish banquet that had been so expertly laid out on the long, elegant refractory table before me could only be described as perfect. Truly, utterly perfect. It was the most sublimely archetypal Thanksgiving dinner that I can imagine. The table was draped in a red velvet cloth and adorned with white doilies. All the cutlery and serving dishes were hand-polished sterling silver. All the drinking goblets were dazzling prismatic crystal, and all the dining plates were gold-trimmed antique porcelain, passed down from generation to generation, longer than anyone could say for certain. Despite all of that, the food itself still managed to be the most coveted thing before me. It was still steaming hot, its beckoning aroma wafting upwards and unbidden towards me, as though trying to lure me in. There was garlic mashed potatoes, mashed turnip, buttered peas and carrots, creamed asparagus, stuffing, giblet gravy, hot rolls, sweet bread, cranberry sauce, pumpkin pie, and a literal cornucopia overflowing with fresh fruit and candy. And of course, the centerpiece was a stuffed turkey, the biggest one I had ever seen.
Tantalizing, isn't it?
The girl in the dress asked from the opposite end of the table. I knew who she was, and I knew her name, but I shall only be referring to her as the girl in the dress. It was both proper and expected that I would be accompanied by a girl in a dress upon such an occasion, and as far as I was concerned, it could have been any girl in a dress. How I wished she was just some random girl in a dress.
Tantalizing in the sense that your situation is reminiscent of the mythical Tantalus. Wouldn't you agree?
The girl in the dress continued, this time failing to suppress a sadistic little smirk. I wasn't sure how long it'd been since I had last eaten, only that I was ravenously hungry. Probably the hungriest I had been in my entire life. And yet, the sumptuous feast before me was just out of reach, as the girl in the dress had bound me to the chair with chains made from the same fine silver that glistened on the table before me. I had sat there, helplessly watching as she set the table with meticulous and seemingly obsequious care, making multiple trips to and from the kitchen with an adorable little cart The turkey she had brought out last, it taking all of her strength to hoist onto the table. You really went to so much trouble just to torment me. I asked hoarsely. My throat was parched, which made sense, as I hadn't had anything to drink in some time either. But for some reason, either the situation itself or something else she had done to me, the hunger was much more prominent in my mind.
Compared to everything else I've ever done for you, this was no trouble at all.
She replied glibly. A grandfather clock in another room softly chimed the hour, though I didn't bother to count the bells.
Oh, good. Dinner time. Food's getting cold, dear. Carve the turkey so we can eat.
Now you suggest I do that, dear. I sneered at her, clattering my restraints against the mahogany armrests of the chair I was in, wondering if maybe I could pull hard enough to break the wood.
It doesn't matter. Thanksgiving dinner is a ritual steeped in antiquated traditions. I upheld my end, spent hours making everything from scratch, and all you have to do is carve the damn turkey.
She hissed vehemently through her teeth.
But, per our usual, all my hard work goes unappreciated, while you can't even fulfill the most trivially token of your obligations. And also, per usual, I expect you have an excuse, rather than an apology. Yes?
You've literally chained me to a goddamn chair. I roared.
No, you see. That's the wrong answer.
She claimed.
You're going to have a lot of time to just sit there and think. And what I want you to think about is whether it's really my fault for putting you through this, or your fault for driving me to this in the first place.
I spat at her. It wasn't hard, considering my mouth held an overabundance of saliva as a result of the bounty of mouth-watering food, but my projectile fell short of its target.
And that's why I went with the refractory table, even though it's just the two of us.
She smirked, smugly placing her chin onto her folded hands. We were both silent for a long while after that. I decided that there was no point in wasting energy on screaming and threatening her. It would be futile, and any display of impotent rage would likely only amuse her. I wouldn't beg either. Not for food, not for freedom, not for anything. And it would be just as futile as threatening her, and far more humiliating. No, instead I focused on turning my arms back and forth in the hope of using the chains to saw through the wooden arms of the chair enough for me to break them. That's all it would take. Me breaking out of the chair to put an end to her little power fantasy and remind her who was boss. The chair was just ordinary wood. It really seemed like I should have had the strength to break it, especially if it was potentially a matter of life and death. But I was weak with hunger, and the hungrier I got, the weaker I got. My limbs lacked nearly all of their usual strength and felt like wet noodles hanging limply from my torso. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't muster any strength in them. Not that I was actually trying all that hard. The feast in front of me made it hard to focus on anything else. I thought that I could ignore it easily enough, that simple sensory saturation would soon render it an obscure background detail. But I was wrong. As my hunger grew, the feast seemed to grow with it. The food more sumptuous, the portions more decadent, every moist, succulent morsel glistening in the candlelight. It was still warm somehow, which made me wonder how long I had actually been there. I forced myself to look away from the glorious meal before me for just a few seconds, to see if I could spot anything that might give some indication of the passage of time. I glanced towards the window, but the curtains were drawn, and I couldn't really remember what time of day it had been to start with anyway. I looked around for a clock, but found none. Instead, what I saw was a painting hung behind the girl in the dress, depicting a mid-20th century American family sitting down to a holiday dinner, albeit one which was austerely meager compared to the one in front of me now.
Do you recognize it?
The girl in the dress asked. What? I asked groggily, unsure what she was even talking about.
The painting.
She clarified, pointing behind her.
It's Freedom from Want by Norman Rockwell. I chose it very specifically because I think freedom from want is exactly your problem. I don't believe you've ever had any non-trivial desire that has ever gone unfulfilled, which is why you're incapable of appreciating anything. You need to learn gratitude, which is what this holiday is all about, after all. You are going to want this food in front of you more than you've ever wanted anything. And when I'm convinced that you're truly capable of appreciating what I've made, of appreciating me, and everything I've done for you, then you can have some. Maybe.
I slumped my head then, in the hopes of falling asleep, and that sleep might see some of my proper strength return to me. I was tired, there was no denying that. Exhausted even, and yet my weariness was nothing when compared to the hunger. The hunger would not allow me to sleep. It obstinately demanded that I satisfy it, and in doing so deprived me of the strength I needed to oblige it. It was a hell of a catch-22, to be sure. The hunger gnawed away at me from the inside, deciding that if I couldn't feed it, then it would feed upon me instead. I could feel the overproduction of acid start to dissolve my stomach walls, burning ulcers growing like cancer as the scorching bile shot up into my throat and dribbled out of my mouth. My innards growled and spasmed, sending waves of hunger pains radiating throughout my body. I was thrown into convulsions, and I dared to hope that these paroxysms might finally give me the strength I needed to break free of the chair, even if they had to break my bones in the process. My bones did break. I know because I saw their jagged, bloody ends sticking out of my mangled appendages. Despite this, I still could not wiggle loose from my chains, nor did I manage to break the arms of the chair. I was probably in the most pain I had ever been in my life, and yet somehow it was still insignificant compared to my exceptionally growing hunger. I was stewing in my own urine and excrement at this point, of course. but it had been some time since I had last evacuated my insides. My bodily stores must have been spent, I assumed. But this sparked a sudden realization in my sleep-deprived, dehydrated, hunger-ravaged brain. The girl in the dress had once left the table in all that time. She'd not yet taken any food or drink, still insisting that I be the one to cut the turkey. Nor had she slept or gone to use the restroom. And yet she still looked as picture-perfect as she had when the whole ordeal started. It was the same with the food. It must have been days. It had to have been days, but the food was still warm and fresh and enticing as it ever had been. This isn't real. I groaned. This can't be real. The food wouldn't still be like this if it had been sitting out for this long. You can't have been sitting there this whole time without eating or sleeping or shitting yourself.
Watch your tongue, dear. It's Thanksgiving.
She gently scolded me. It's not fucking Thanksgiving. It's probably not even still fucking November anymore. I screamed. It was then that I heard the sound of Westminster chimes as the grandfather clock in the other room signaled that it was now 1/4 the hour. And to my horror, I'd realized that this was the first time I had heard it since dinner had started.
What are you babbling about? It's only been 15 minutes, you big baby.
She taunted me.
But dinner is getting cold, and I'm getting hungry. So carve the turkey so that we can eat.
No. That's impossible. I murmured, the state of my body a testament to the fact that I had been bound there for days. And yet, the girl in the dress, the food on the table, and the chiming of the grandfather clock all stood testament to the fact I had not. How? I asked, more to myself than to the girl in the dress. I could think of no explanation for the gaping contradiction before me, nor did my hostess offer one. The horrifying implications of this paradox were obvious to me, even in my famished and exhausted state. If what felt like days to me were just minutes to her, then how long would she be able to keep me here? I got my answer soon enough. I was well past the point where I should have died of dehydration, and yet I continued to starve. I should have been hallucinating from the lack of sleep, and yet my hunger kept me lucid. The hunger, along with its effects on my mind and body, were distorting my experience of time. And the stronger my hunger grew, the more distorted time became. I sat there helplessly as my body wasted away to a mummified skeleton over what felt like weeks to me, only to break down into tears when I heard the Westminster chimes once again, letting me know that it was now 1/2 the hour. The hungrier I got, the slower time moved, which meant I would probably be in a seemingly perpetual state of endless starvation without ever actually dying. Though my salvation was within arm's reach, I could not move my arms. I lacked the strength to even struggle against the chains now, and I feared that even if they were removed, I wouldn't have the strength to feed myself anyway.
Do you think that's enough then?
the girl in the dress asked.
If I unchain you, will you actually be grateful for once? For the food, for your freedom, for your life. For me. Just say it. If you can't say you're sorry and mean it, say how much you need me. Say how grateful you are to have had me in your life. And then beg me for help. I might do it.
Considering my severe state of bodily degradation, I knew that I would likely only be able to muster a couple of words. I think she realized that as well. With that in mind, I chose those 2 words very carefully. Fuck you. I coughed. Without warning, she slammed her hands down on the table and, for the first time since she had sat down, stood up from her chair.
You absolute fucking bastard! Why can't you let me have this?
She demanded, angry tears now rolling down her hot cheeks.
I literally offer you a feast when you're fucking starving, and you still can't appreciate me. I'm trying to help you, trying to make you a better person, and you still don't fucking care.
You're not the one chained to a chair. I forced myself to wheeze out. If I'm so much trouble, leave. Her face contorted wildly then, as if I had somehow just stabbed her through the heart. The angry tears gave way to ones of unadulterated sorrow, and without saying another word, she sat back down in her chair, then began sobbing into her hands. It was then that the chains holding me in place finally slackened and clattered to the floor, and whatever sort of spell I had been under was broken. I was, at long last, free to slake my hunger. But as I reached towards the table, my hopes of gorging myself upon a bountiful feast were cruelly snatched away. Now that my experience of time was in sync with realities again, it seemed that some toll needed to be exacted. The food which had remained miraculously preserved for so long now looked like it had been sitting out for weeks, swarming with flies and swimming with maggots. Everything was discolored and desiccated and smothered with hideous mold. A fetid reek of rot hung heavily in the air, slowly creeping out and infusing its stench into anything it came into contact with. And as I shoved the first handful of rancid, moldy, maggot-ridden turkey into my mouth, I felt thankful.
If you put your ear to the railroad track, you can hear the sound of train wheels thundering hundreds of miles away. I rode on into the Big Apple inside the gut of a boxcar that stank of straw. and old cardboard, and an all-pervasive unidentifiable funk you'd swear had been moldering since Satan took his first teenage swan dive of rebellion from out of God's celestial hayloft. I felt the unmistakable reverberation of something coming, and yet I was as helpless to avoid it as a deer in a pair of oncoming headlights. Traveling by boxcar is out of style these days. Nowadays, people travel by cellular phone, and megabytes, and blinks of existence flashing by on some unknown deity's computer screen. But I don't care for any of that. I'm a bit of an archaism, I suppose. A man who likes to do things in his own way. And whenever I travel, I like to take the train. You want a picture of me? Color me lean and dark, streaks of lightning where the eyes should be. A few too many scars, a few too many unanswerable questions etched in the fur of my brow. Lines around the eyes where the crows tap danced a little too closely, making me older than you ever should guess. I wear a sailor's pea coat, given to me by an old Dutchman tired of wandering. I've crowned myself with a black watch cap to keep the cold off my ears and the rain off my head. And there's a stout pair of army boots, nearly worn out from 1,000 miles of wandering, for the battles I had to fight. We'll get to one of these battles by and by. Like I said, I rode into New York City just around midnight. I jumped from the boxcar. I felt the comforting crush of good old terra firma slamming up through the soles of my feet and accordionating my knees. I made a perfect 3 1/2 point landing. 2 feet, 1 hand, and the left cheek of my buttocks. What the hell? Anyone you walk away from is all right by me. I stood up, looking wary for the railroad police. I dusted myself off and looked around again, double wary. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched by a pair or two of eyes. I turned around, and that's when I saw him. He stood in the shadows of a switch house, staring at me like I was a midnight snack he'd been waiting for all night. The piggyback man. The one who never rides alone. Oh, I didn't know him right off, but I knew straight away there was something unnatural about this man. Something in the way he seemed to move, even when he was standing still. Something in the way he looked like he was a tallow candle wicking itself down into a pool of nasty fat. Out Arkansas way, I'd seen a man standing in the belly of a burning barn, wearing a skin full of fire like it was some kind of kingly cape. He had looked like one of those x-ray pictures your doctor will show you, like his skin was a lampshade and you could see the bones shining blackly through. He had looked that way for a heartbeat or so, until he knelt over the body of the woman he had run into the barn to try and rescue. And the two of them went up together like 13-year-old pitch pine. That was the way it was with this fellow, like he was sizzling away, like he was vanishing, like a mouthful of spit spat onto a pancake griddle. Now, living on the road like I do, I'd seen a lot of hungry men. Bull up or wire out. That's the way it goes when you're living hand to mouth. Some fellows get thicker the emptier they get, like bears in hibernation, while other men wire out like they were getting set to hitch a ride on the next southbound breeze. Usually when I see a fella looking this hungry, I try and find him something to eat, but I didn't think I could spare what this fellow was hungering for. He looked lean, but not the kind of hunger a weekend at McDonald's would cure. Not 1,000 Texas prime rib steaks were going to heal this fellow's hunger. There was something in the way he eyeballed me that made me feel like a virgin at a satir's ball. Like he was getting ready to kick my tires and take me out for a test spin. He walked on over. I thought about running away, but I've got this curious streak running about a mile wide right down the center of my soul. I was 3 parts alley cat, my granddad once told me, after pulling me out of an old Indian cave where I'd spent 2 nights speaking with something that hadn't had a tongue in a hellish long time. Granddad said, "Easter, God put a question mark in men's souls so they'd know how to wonder why. But you don't always have to find an answer now, do you?" I don't know about that, Granddad. I always thought wonder sounded like wander, and sooner or later, if there was something that moved beyond knowledge, I had to go on over and have a look. So I walk on over to say hello to the piggyback man. "Yeah, a fine morning if the sun don't shine too hard," I said, even though it was around about midnight. He narrowed his eyes and blinked. There was something about that. Something in the way he blinked. Twice in the space of what should have been a single blink. Like his eyelids were trying to echo themselves. So I winked back once and kept on talking. "Yeah, it's a fine night for a walk." He blinked again and a chunk of his left ear fell off. Well, I bent down and picked it up. That probably wasn't the wisest thing I'd ever done, but I just couldn't help it. What the hell? It probably wouldn't hurt. The flesh was cold and hot, both together at the same time, like a snowflake when it's melting in your hand. I held the ear out to him. "You dropped it," I said, trying to keep the terror out of my voice. He blinked. As far as I could see, nothing more dropped off. "Yeah, not much for words, are you?" Blink. I yawned and stretched. "Listen," I said. "Philosophizing with you has been 7 kinds of pure bliss. Yeah, but I've been sitting in that boxcar the last 3 days. I'm ready to stretch my legs. Yeah, you want to walk with me then? I don't mind the company." Well, he finally spoke. When he did, it was the kind of sound you'd expect to hear from a snake that had somehow learned to speak. "I never mind company," he said. A tooth fell out his mouth in mid-company. I think it was a molar. I didn't bother bending to pick it up. "You're just all over the place, aren't you? A man of many parts and not afraid to say so," I said. "Maybe you ought to mind your tongue before it falls out your jawbone." He hissed then, and I thought, yeah, he's a snake all right. "What's your name?" he asked. Now, I learned the hard way a long time ago that names were just handles people used to get a hold of you, and some voice inside me warned that if I give this piggyback man a name, he'd grab a hold of me. "I used to have a name," I said, "but I lost it in my wallet. Call me Pilgrim, that'll do for now." He hissed again, and I knew he didn't care for my answer. Just then a third voice spoke from out of the darkness. "Hey, who the hell are you?" A light, as bright as a full noon sun, stabbed me in the eyes. I blinked, and for a moment I saw double. When my vision cleared, I saw who had spoken. A railroad cop, big and old and fat, from too many midnight fried chicken platters, and too many swallows of bourbon. His red nose tattle-toed that last story. It wasn't cold enough to blame the gin blossoms on the midnight chill. The name tag on his shirt read McGuire. "McGuire," said the piggyback man, and I heard him grin. The railroad cop turned at the sound of his name. "Would that be Charlie McGuire?" the piggyback man asked playfully. Before I could say a word of warning, McGuire answered.
Officer Michael William McGuire. And what's it to you?
Oh, it's an awful lot to me.
Said the piggyback man.
An awful lot.
And then it began, and was over as quick as it started. McGuire didn't stand a chance. He didn't even see it coming, but I did. I saw a whisper of smoke blurring out of the piggyback man's eyes, and then a little bit of that smoke blew into McGuire's eyes, and for a moment it looked like the wind was blowing straight through his old cop bones. And then the body that the piggyback man was riding in dropped to the dirt. From the sound of it, not all the king's horsemen were ever putting that jigsaw puzzle back again. And McGuire, he looked at me and blinked. Twice. And that's when I knew for certain. I knew who he was, all right. This was the piggyback man, the one who never walks alone. More spirit than man, made out of hellfire and the stuff that dances in the shadows of atoms. Always looking for a ride on somebody else's back. Yeah. Always hanging around the darkest areas of the world, like cemeteries or subways or train yards. I know what you are, piggyback man, I said. I just don't know who you are. Why don't you give me a name to call you by? It was a stupid try, but it was all I had. If he told me his real name, the one he whispered to the darkness when nobody else was listening, then I could tell him where to get off. Once you know a thing's true name, you own it outright. You think about that the next time somebody asks you for 2 pieces of identification, please.
I'd be a fool to tell you that. Now wouldn't I, boy?
He drew the words fool and boy out long and slow, like a pair of bullets whistling by your ears on the smoke-filled battlefield. Yeah, and I knew by that sound that I'd clearly missed my shot.
What did you say your name was?
The piggyback man tried right back. I shook my head. I said. Not tonight. The thing that used to be McGuire smiled.
Perhaps another night. When this body starts to burn.
The piggyback man turned and just about walked away. He'd be gone and into the darkness if I didn't do something. And I had to, you understand. I had to do something about this monstrosity. It wouldn't suit me to let him slip on by. I heard a train whistle blowing in the distant darkness. I put my foot on the rail beside me. I felt the quivering rumble of the approaching freight through the sole of my army boot. It was coming close. I had me a crazy idea. Yeah, another night, when that body starts to burn, I taunted. Yeah, it won't be long, will it now? Fat old body like that. It'll burn like running tallow, won't it? But the piggyback man paused. Yeah, you want something younger than that, don't you? You want something tastier. Something with legs that'll carry you farther than the next whistle stop. The piggyback man stood as still as he could. There was something in the way he stood reminded me of a fat man unsuccessfully trying to resist a freely offered French cream pastry. And I knew it was time to take my chance. My name is Easter Noon, I shouted. Capital Easter, capital Noon, and you can spell it just like it sounds. The piggyback man didn't budge. I could feel his greed for fresh new life licking at my bones like a tongue of flame licking at a brand new log. Easter Noon, I repeated, a little quieter, like I was casting a dare. My name's Easter Noon, and I have walked through more shadows than the sun could imagine. I have stood in hollows so deep old Beelzebub would have to crane his neck downward to look me in the eye. I'm calling you out, here and now, piggyback man. I'm calling you out for the low-down, legless son of a bitch that you are. Then I drew a line in the dirt and waited. I heard the train whistle howling a little closer in the darkness. I hoped old Piggyback wouldn't keep me waiting too long, because if that train passed before he jumped, I'd be in it, as deep as I could get. Well, somebody must have been listening to my prayer, because old Piggyback let McGuire drop stone dead. I could feel a cold wind whooshing up towards me, but I was as ready as I could be. I caught him, smoke and wind and all, catching at the nothing that made up his something, the way you might catch a wild dog in mid-pounce, twisting and holding it closer to my bones. I don't quite know how I did it, you understand. I had entered the borders of fly-by-your-seat land a long time ago. I just grabbed on, and somehow I felt them, like a handful of wet cellophane or something even thinner than that. "Come here, damn you! Come here!" I shouted. Then I heard the whistle howling closer, and I squeezed onto the piggyback man a little tighter and stepped onto the track, grinning like a crazy man in the sudden screaming headlamp. "Hold on, piggyback man, hold on. I'll take you with me when I go." That's when he twisted. I felt him twist somewhere deep inside of me, and it was like trying to hang on to a live buttered snake. I knew it was frightening that it didn't want to be inside of me when that train hit me dead on. I don't know if it knew just what might happen. I think it was just afraid of what could happen. Me too. I felt cold fingers inside of me, catching at my heart and my brain and my spinal column, catching at something beneath all that, trying to get a hold of whatever it was that was my steering wheel. It almost had me too, but I wedged my boot into the notch of the switch rail, so that even if old Piggyback got a hold of me, he probably wouldn't have time to get away. The train was 5 feet away when I felt old Piggyback leave me. I could smell the stink of the Russian diesel as I felt it leave, and I knew that McGuire was probably not much good to the Piggyback man. And I hoped that whatever this Piggyback thing was, that it couldn't exist alone on its own 2 feet. So as I felt it leave, I threw myself sideways, fully expecting to feel the screaming pain of the steel wheels grinding my left foot down to something less than nothing, when the sole of my army surplus boot pulled away, and the rusty nails that held the sole to the body of my boot pulled away, and I tumbled head over ass into the dirt and cinders lying beside the track. The train held angrily by, and I was nearly pulled under the wheels by the slipstream, but I grabbed hold of McGuire's meaty carcass and held on fast. The train was gone as quickly as it came. Nothing but a bit of dust blowing behind it, the heavy reek of diesel and steel, and the cold, musky scent of McGuire's dead body. I carefully stood, giving a silent thanks and apology to McGuire, wherever he was now, feeling the uncomfortable roughness of railroad cinder ballast against the work sock on my left foot. I stood there for a long time, listening to the wind, and every now and then touching the rail with my sock foot just to be sure. I thought about the engineer and wondered if the piggyback man had a chance at him. I decided he hadn't, because he hadn't a chance to ask the engineer his name. Hard to ask a question like that when you're smoke without any tongue. I thought about that big old train, thought about the way sometimes engineers have nicknames for their diesels, and about how they sometimes paint a name on the nose of their trains. And I wondered if the piggyback man had somehow got inside of it. I decided I didn't have an answer to that one, and it made me shiver like the wind was suddenly colder than it needed to be. I stood there alone and shivering until the sun began to come up. Only one thing left to do. When I was done with that, I limped my way towards the city, grateful for the feeling of the sun on my skin and the touch of a dead man's boots. Thankful that McGuire hadn't had very small feet.
Turn the car around.
Don had just settled into his relaxed, long drive posture. Huh?
Just turn around.
Marjorie's tone was urgent.
We need to go back to the motel.
Why? It's miles to the next exit.
Sorry, I left my makeup kit in the bathroom.
She was embarrassed.
We need to get there before the cleaning crew picks it up.
He groaned. Can't you just buy more?
Have you priced cosmetics lately? It's a couple of $100 at least. Not to mention the fancy case your mother gave me for my birthday.
They were back at the motel in 20 minutes. Don stayed in the car, listening to the radio, while Marjorie finagled a key from the disgruntled desk attendant. She raced down the hall and breathed a sigh of relief when she saw the unmade bed, the untouched room. She retrieved her case from the bathroom and glanced around to make sure they hadn't left anything else. That's when she saw the bear. A teddy bear, perched regally on a pillow, leaned nonchalantly against the bed's fake headboard. How could it have gotten there? Someone must have come in and left it. The cleaning crew? But the room hadn't been touched. She picked it up and looked into its happy face. It seemed oddly familiar, comforting. She couldn't resist hugging the little thing. It felt so good that for a moment, she forgot Don was waiting in the car. She couldn't just leave it. She took the bear with her as she walked back to the front desk, intending to leave it at reception. Nobody was there. She banged on the bell, but no one appeared. On impulse, she dropped the key next to the computer and walked out the door with the bear. "What's that?" asked Don. He started the car and pulled out of the parking lot.
My makeup case and a teddy bear.
"Yeah, I can see that. Where'd you get him?"
Why him? She looks quite feminine to me.
She held the bear next to her face and kissed it. "Well, excuse me. Where'd you get her?" He glanced over and shook his head as his wife gave the bear an extravagant hug.
Found her in the room waiting for me, and I couldn't just leave her there.
"Oh no, of course not," he said sarcastically. "But right now, some little girl is crying her eyes out. Mother's probably on the cleaning crew."
Don't be mean. The room hadn't been touched.
So the bear walked in on her own? He glanced at his wife doubtfully.
Whatever. She's mine now, and we'll give her a good home.
"What do you mean, we? This is on you."
Look at it this way. I rescued her. She's underage, and they were probably forcing her to clean toilets.
And Marjorie was off on one of her flights.
I think we've stumbled onto a child slavery ring. The local law is on our tail now. Wants to nab us for child abduction and crossing state lines. Have you heard of the Mann Act? We're partners in a federal crime, Don. So romantic. Like Bonnie and Clyde.
Jeez. You and your imagination. Anyway, it's not a child. Both their grins faded. They were silent for many miles. They stopped for lunch at a McDonald's, and Marjorie brought the bear inside. Don shook his head. Marjorie, I've always said you're not afraid of what people think, but sometimes...
It gets hot in the car. We can't leave her in there.
Couple $100 worth of makeup is melting, but this teddy bear won't survive?
Men don't understand.
How right you are. They sat in a booth and ate their Big Macs and fries. The bear sat next to Marjorie in the booth. At least she didn't put it in a high chair, he thought, or try to feed it. As though reading his mind, she held a fry up to its mouth. She turned to Don's open-mouthed stare and laughed uproariously.
You should see your face,
she roared. Don shook his head. Marjorie, darling, you worry me sometimes. She was still laughing as they walked back to the car. It was blazing hot inside the car, and they opened all the doors while Don ran the air conditioner at max. He studied the map on his phone, checked his trip notes, and calculated how far it was to the first national park. In their little family, Don was the plotting planner, the get-it-done engineer. He'd been working on the itinerary for a month, obviously plotting out their route, researching the highlights of each park, the distance between them, and the best places to stay. No detail was too small. They each had their own way of dealing with the loss, and this was his. Now he could check off the first leg of the trip, the 2-day drive from Fort Worth, and start working through the major milestones on his list. Over the next 2 weeks, they would visit 9 national parks: Bryce Canyon, Great Basin, Arches, Zion, Mesa Verde, Rocky Mountain, Canyonlands, Capitol Reef, and Great Sand Dunes. It was a daunting schedule, but Don was confident they could do it. When he looked up, he noticed Marjorie doing something in the back seat. He turned to see her pulling the seat belt around the bear. There's probably a Walmart down the road. Why don't we stop and buy a car seat? Maybe a sippy cup. She laughed.
Don't be silly. I don't want her rolling around, maybe falling on the floor.
She snapped the buckle into place and slammed the door shut.
Doesn't she look cute?
Don glanced back at the bear, who stared at him with its fixed grin. Oh yeah, real cute. Marjorie climbed in the front seat, smiling.
Come on, lighten up. It's just for fun.
He sighed and started the car. As he pulled onto the highway, he could feel the bear's eyes on the back of his head. So, what should we call him?
Her?
She reminded him.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that.
They began running through possibilities. It was the kind of game people play on long car trips, and Marjorie's free-ranging mind was good at it. When Don tried to change the subject to their destination or to point out the foothills just appearing in the distance, Marjorie would respond half-heartedly, then suddenly interject a new name.
How about Beauregard? Beauregard Bear,
she said brightly. You mean the Confederate general? Jeff Sessions' middle name? No way! Don decided to humor her. He countered with, You like Beastie Bear? Like my favorite band? Back when?
I'd rather call her the Beartles. Or the Bear 52s. John Bear Jovi? Kurt Cobain.
And on it went. They crept slowly up the mountain, ascending through a series of winding switchbacks. The view was spectacular. Marjorie took the bear from the back seat and held it up to the window. The bear's expression did not change, and she sighed. Don kept his eyes on the road. Marjorie took out her hairbrush and began combing the bear's fur.
She likes this. It was getting mussed up with all the handling.
She examined the bottom of its foot.
Oh my God.
Dawn glanced over. What? She had her hand on her chest, staring with surprise at the bottom of the bear's foot.
That mark, see it?
He glanced over quickly, but saw only a smear. I can't look now. I'm trying to stay on the damned road. He swerved sharply around another switchback. What is it?
There's a mark on its foot. My old bear, the one I had as a kid, she had the same mark.
And what's it say? Made in China? Like everything else we own?
No, it's with a pen. I marked my bear that same way, with my initials, and it kind of got smeared after a while. Just like this one.
So what's it say?
Hard to tell.
She held the foot in the sun and squinted.
Now you'll know I'm crazy, and I think it's MJ. My initials.
Don's stomach knotted up, then relaxed. She had to be joking. Momentarily distracted, he drifted across the center line. A pickup appeared around the next switchback, going downhill too fast. The driver blared his horn and gestured as Don swerved back into his lane. Shit, he swore under his breath. When he turned to Marjorie, she was holding her hands over the bear's ears.
Don't curse in front of her,
she said, oblivious to the near miss. Fucking Christ, he said. Look, I'm really getting tired of this, Marjorie. She looked hurt and turned toward the window. They were silent for the next hour. She kept the bear in her lap, but held it up to the window from time to time and whispered into its ear. Don lay on one bed at the hotel that night, studying the maps and brochures he'd scattered about, while Marjorie lay on the other bed. She was holding the bear in one arm, phone in the other, scrolling through texts and emails.
Mother wants me to call her.
She sighed.
I guess I'd better. It could take a while. You know Mom,
she said, putting the phone to her ear. Don tried to tune out the conversation, but his ears perked up when Marjorie mentioned the bear.
Oh, guess what? I found the most darling little teddy bear. Somebody must have left it in the motel where we stayed 2 nights ago. He's been riding along with us, and Don and I have been showing him the sights.
Don gritted his teeth. That would be you, not me, he thought.
And the funniest thing is, you know how I made a mark on the foot of my bear? Well, I found that same mark on this bear. It's smeared, but it looks just like what I wrote. You know, my initials.
As Marjorie listened, Don forced his attention back to the brochure on Bryce Canyon, the next day's destination. His concentration was interrupted by Marjorie's change in tone.
No, that's wrong. Of course I did. How could you forget?
Another long pause. Then her voice rose in volume.
Mother, don't be ridiculous. I did have a bear. That's why this is so weird. Is something going on with your memory?
He glanced over and saw his wife's wrinkled brow.
I'm not insulting you.
She was shaking her head, and he thought her lip was trembling.
I know. Kids remember things differently, but I had that bear for years until Dad...
Minutes later, she hung up with a chilly,
"Goodbye, Mother."
Marjorie sat and stared at the blank TV screen while she stroked the bear with her right hand. What was that all about? He asked.
Nothing,
she said. Come on. You never talk to your mother that way. What did she say? Marjorie wouldn't look at him.
She said...
Marjorie paused to catch her breath.
She said I never had a bear. My father refused to let me have one, and he said it created dependency, like sucking your thumb.
Oh, wow. Don shook his head. That sounds like the general, all right. The old guy was a bit rigid, wasn't he? Don thought the word rigid was charitable. When he and Marjorie went on dates, Don would have to meet beforehand with her father and describe his exact plans for the evening. Fortunately, Don's careful planning and earnest manner met with the General's grudging approval. Nevertheless, Don always left their house bathed in sweat. One night, the very night he'd planned to propose, the old man had a massive coronary and died.
Mother's wrong. I did have a bear, and it looked just like ours.
You were a kid, and she was an adult. How could she forget that? Maybe you just imagined it. She shook her head, but her normally serene face had a troubled expression. She grabbed the remote and turned on the TV, then wrapped both arms around the bear and hugged it tightly. She soon fell asleep, and they spoke no more that night. Over the next 2 weeks, they kept to the schedule and rolled through all 9 national parks. Don's bucket list, work plan in project management terms, was to visit all 62 national parks. They had honeymooned at Yosemite and visited the big ones in subsequent years, including Yellowstone and Grand Canyon. They were set to start on the lesser-known parks when the baby came, temporarily shelving plans. Afterward, Don revived the plan as a means of escape. This trip to the western parks, all relatively close together, would knock off 9 more, as he put it. On the 14th day, even Don had to admit to scenic exhaustion. Marjorie, disciplined from youth by her father not to object, had endured the marathon stoically. She never complained about stopping for the next spectacular rock pillar, bottomless chasm, or mountain view, but Don began to feel guilty about putting his wife through his relentless itinerary. They had learned to cut each other considerable slack after the loss, and he in turn held his tongue as she brushed the bear's fur, chatted with it, and held it up to the window for each new sight. Nevertheless, as the trip wore on, his patience grew thin. They never settled on a name. She simply called it Bear. The last park was Great Sand Dunes, encompassing 30 square miles and described in the brochure as a sandbox of epic proportions. For sure, it was spectacular and amazing, but as they pulled out of the parking lot, Don felt jaded. He regretted they would end the tour on that weak note. As they began the 2-hour drive to Taos, he made a reluctant admission. 9 parks, 14 days. Thank God we'll never have to do that again. They both laughed, breaking the chill.
Aw, Donnie, you loved it. For about 8 days, anyway.
I'd say 10. Okay, 9. The last 4 have been a slog. I love the parks, so I hated when they began to look the same. The same visitor center, same exhibits, same magnificent scenery.
Well, Bear loved it. She never got tired.
Mentioning the bear chilled the conversation. Over the next few days, his feelings had alternated between concern and annoyance. Sure, kids could have imaginary friends, but grown-ups? His own wife? Marjorie had carried the bear into every roadside bathroom, curio shop, and restaurant. In shops, they usually browsed separately, and often he'd look down an aisle and see her showing some little trinket, a colored stone, a piece of jewelry, to the bear. It always sat on her lap or at the favored spot next to her in the booth in restaurants. Outside Taos, they stopped for lunch at a Denny's, probably their 10th of the trip. Someone had left a high chair next to their table, and Marjorie automatically placed the bear in it. Don shuddered, but said nothing. Minutes later, a blue-haired, tattooed waitress arrived.
"Should I take away the chair, or would you like a kid's menu for the little beast?"
Her tone was decidedly snarky. "Yeah, take the damn thing," he said curtly. He grabbed the bear and tossed it into the booth next to Marjorie, who looked shocked, and sat it up carefully beside her.
Don, you could have hurt her,
said Marjorie, as she smoothed the bear's fur. He caught the waitress's eye as her pierced brow rose. "Inside joke," he said sheepishly. That evening, in Taos, they treated themselves to a lavish meal at a fancy restaurant with white tablecloths, heavy silverware, and overly attentive waiters. I think we deserve this," laughed Don after his first glass of champagne. They held up their glasses in a toast to our healths and to national parks. God bless Teddy Roosevelt. Marjorie held the glass up.
To Teddy, for giving us the teddy bear.
She swung her glass round to the bear.
And to the day we found our sweet little bear, the most wonderful darling anyone could wish for.
Don said nothing and quickly drained his glass. He poured himself another and another. He tried to change the subject, but their conversational well had run dry. Across the table, Marjorie gazed lovingly at the bear and smoothed its fur, and the bear stared at Don. The next morning, Don opened his aching eyes and found himself nose to nose with the bear. It was hangover time, complete with waves of nausea and a roaring headache. He shoved it roughly off the bed. Then he reached down to retrieve it and laid it carefully next to Marjorie. He did not want to start their next to last day on a sour note. He took a scalding hot shower, hoping in vain the steaming spray would magically ease his pain, but even pressing his forehead hard against the tile wall gave no relief. Toweling off, he found his wife still asleep, clutching the bear tight with both arms. He felt a wave of jealousy toward the beast as he'd come to think of it. That waitress had called it right, he thought. He cheered up when he remembered the day's destination, the Rio Grande Gorge Bridge, the massive steel deck arch bridge that crossed the Rio Grande River 10 miles outside of Taos. It was their last stop, and he'd been looking forward to it for the entire trip. His interest was partly professional as a civil engineer, but the personal connection was its real attraction. His uncle, a retired engineer who had inspired Don to enter the profession, worked on the bridge as a young man. He talked about those 2 years as the highlight of his career. Completed in 1965 at the height of 600 feet, it was one of the 10 highest bridges in the United States. It had a magnificent view, and Don's engineering organization had named it the most beautiful steel bridge in Materials Performance magazine. Neither of them was in the mood for breakfast, so they left the motel and headed out Highway 64 for the 15-minute drive. As they passed the airport, his excitement grew. He chatted merrily about the bridge's cantilever truss structure and how it had recently received a year-long facelift. Marjorie nodded gravely. Minutes later, they were on the bridge itself. He slowed down, glancing back and forth from the road to the gleaming girders and trusses until he heard the blare of a car horn behind him. The minivan driver was honking at him to speed up, and he suppressed his annoyance and urged the car from 20 to 30. The visitors' parking lot was on the other side of the bridge. He turned in and found a spot across from a line of vendors. He was annoyed when the impatient minivan parked next to him, too close, and its doors swung open to disgorge a pair of yelling children. He had to wait until the heavy-set woman laboriously climbed out and closed her door before he could open his. Marjorie was standing at the back of the car when he finally got out. The minivan driver was less than 10 feet away, an obese man with a shaved head in a tank top.
You know, you didn't have to honk the horn like that,
said Don crossly. He rarely said anything confrontational, but his headache had not abated. Why the hell did I say that? He wondered. Surprisingly, the burly man apologized.
Sorry about that. The wife reached over and pressed the horn. She's been fighting with the boys all morning.
Okay, no problem. He felt embarrassed. As if on cue, the woman in the pink stretchy shorts began yelling at her two boys and slapped both of them, one of whom began crying.
"Cry, baby,"
said the other, which earned him a second slap. Marjorie turned to Don, holding the bear to her chest.
I hate for our bear to see anything like that. It scares her.
She hugged it tighter and spoke into its ear.
We'd never do anything like that to you, don't worry.
Look, well, let's wait a while, said Don, until they're gone. They strolled toward the line of vendors. The row of pickup trucks and makeshift racks and tables seemed a permanent fixture along one side of the parking lot. They browsed through racks of turquoise and silver bracelets and necklaces, velvet paintings and tinkling wind chimes. Taciturn Native Americans sat in the shade of their pickups and stared at nothing. Marjorie picked out a small beaded necklace and, much to Don's chagrin, hung it around the neck of the bear.
Doesn't she look good in it?
Mortified, Don handed a $5 bill to the woman, who remained impassive as she fished around in her cash box for the dollar change. I guess she's seen everything from us pale faces now, he thought. Pedestrian walkways lined both sides of the bridge, and he guided Marjorie across the road, hoping the family from the minivan had taken the nearby side. Outposts had been constructed on the walkway so tourists could walk out and look straight down to the Rio Grande, a dizzying 600 feet below. Don, Marjorie, and the bear peered over the chest-high bars, standing next to a call box marked Crisis Hotline. There is hope. Make the call. He'd read the bridge was famous for jumpers because it had no suicide barrier. Just then, the same two bratty boys ran up, jostled them aside, and stuck their heads through the bars. They began spitting vigorously into the depths, then picked up rocks and hurled them into the gorge.
"Don't do that!"
Don yelled. They both looked up at him, defiant and unafraid. Clearly, they were so used to being yelled at that Don's reprimand had little effect. The older one leaned casually against the suicide call box, smirking. They might have to talk me out of a double homicide, he thought sardonically. Behind him came a hostile voice.
"I just about had it with you, Buster."
It was the obese man with his wife.
"You can't talk to my kids that way."
Don looked him in the eye.
"It's against the law to throw anything from the bridge,"
he said, "and if it's not a law, it should be." The wife glared at him.
They're just boys. If you know what's good for you, you'll leave them alone.
To her kids, she said,
Come on, sweet things. You leave that mean man be.
The parting shot from the man stung.
If you had any kids of your own, you'd know better.
Don felt his face grow hot. The boys smirked and each spat once more through the barriers before they backed off and skipped away. Don turned to look down at the river, trying to regain a bit of calm, serene wonder he'd expected to feel. Over his shoulder, he heard the older boy yell,
"That lady's talking to her teddy bear. She must be crazy."
They began chanting,
"Crazy, crazy, crazy,"
as they ran down the walkway. Don felt sick to his stomach, but Marjorie was unfazed. She stroked the bear and cooed into its ear.
Don't worry, Daddy's just a little upset.
The next moment was lost in a blur of rage. He snatched the bear from Marjorie's arms and hurled it over the bars and down into the gorge. It descended as a whirling blur, falling and spinning into the void. A horrendous animal scream erupted from his wife as she threw out her arms and placed her foot on the lower rail as though to jump after the bear.
Marjorie, no! God, what are you doing?
Don grabbed her waist and held her as she continued to scream and flail, as her voice hoarsened and turned into uncontrollable sobs. People turned and stared. Don tried to hold her and apologize, but she flung off his arms and rushed away from him. She marched back toward the car, and he had no choice but to let her go. He was shocked at what he'd done. His annoyance had evaporated, replaced by a terrible shame.
Why did I do that? I'm a fucking idiot.
Blessedly, the minivan was gone by the time they got back to the car. He beeped to unlock the door, and she jumped in.
Marjorie, I'm sorry. I don't know what made me...
His apology was cut short as she slammed the door shut. She cried back to Taos. As they left the town limits, heading south toward Fort Worth, Marjorie stopped crying.
Stop the car,
she said harshly.
What for? Do you want a drink or something?
Just stop the car. Open the trunk.
He did as he was told. Marjorie opened her suitcase and brought 2 pill bottles back with her. He watched her gulp down a Xanax and an Ambien.
That's probably not a good idea to mix those,
he whispered.
Shut up,
she said. It was an 11-hour drive back to Fort Worth, planned for 2 days, but Don wouldn't have stopped for anything. He drove like a man possessed, pausing only for snack food and bathroom breaks. Marjorie dozed for the first few hours, twitching convulsively in her sleep. He felt awful when she seemed to be reaching for the bear, but her arms found only empty air. It had been less than 2 months since they had lost their baby girl to sudden infant death syndrome. SIDS. Crib death was the silent fear of many new parents, and they had experienced its full horror. Each had coped in their own way, and Don's outlet had been his obsessive planning for the trip. Marjorie was different. Except for the Xanax and an antidepressant she soon stopped taking, she'd simply cried. She seemed to welcome the trip, and Don admired her resilience. When the trip began, he let himself hope her old, buoyant self had returned. 4 hours later, she spoke. It startled him because he hadn't realized she was awake.
I'm sorry about how I acted,
she said. Don felt a wave of relief and spoke in a rush.
No, it's all my fault, Margie.
There's no excuse from what I did. That bear meant a lot to you, and...
No, I shouldn't have gotten so attached. It was sick. It started out as a game, but I took it too far and I couldn't stop. It was wrong.
Honey, it wasn't wrong. She began crying again.
I miss our baby.
She wailed. Don pulled over to the side of the road. He was crying too. They held each other and sobbed. It was after midnight when he pulled into their garage. Marjorie stumbled into the house while Don struggled with the suitcases. He was dragging both of them through the living room when he heard a terrifying shriek from down the hall. He dropped everything and ran to the bedroom. Marjorie was laughing and sobbing, hugging something to her chest. When she saw Don, she unfolded her arms and held them out. It was the bear.
She came back. She came back to me.
Her words were lost in a torrent of hysterical sobs. Don felt the world spinning as he leaned against the wall and slid to the floor. Her crying never abated. It was after 5 when he finally took her to the hospital, clutching the bear. The doctor sedated her and insisted on holding her for observation. He sent Don home to get some badly needed sleep. The house felt deadly empty. The bedroom, worse. When Don pulled back the covers, he found a note that had slipped between the bed and the bedside table. It was from Marjorie's mother, Doris. She had a key to the house and had watered their plants while they were gone. He read the note with shaking hands. Dear Marge, so sorry about our last phone call. You were right. You did get a bear once. This bear from your Aunt Nancy. I remember now that your father immediately took it away from you. Something about dependency. How you cried. I found it in the attic trunk last night, where he had hid it so many years ago. I wish he hadn't done it, but that's the way he was. Love, Mom.
Prologue. Joey slowly opened her eyes. Tingles of numbing sensations prickled throughout her body. Not being able to focus on any one thought, she attempted to squint through the foggy, blurred vision at what she could make out. The color green was predominant, along with hues of blue, brown, and dark black. She lay still as her head pounded with each pulse of unrelenting, throbbing aches. Joey struggled, unable to remember or recognize any of the surroundings she now felt encased. Not the smells, the sounds, not anything. Everything appeared and felt entirely unfamiliar. Suddenly, the crippling pain washed across her body in a crashing wave. It started in her legs, then oddly moved calmly past her torso, but again raged throughout both arms. Shackled with sharp attacks of gripping stings, Joey was paralyzed, lacking the mobility to move her body much at all. Wave after wave of shock rolled through her mind and body as she attempted to cry out. It was as if she were being stretched and pulled by the wooden horse, an ancient Roman rack used to torture prisoners by stretching them until their joints would dislocate. Without warning,
Joey's ears became keenly aware to a strange whirring sound. She wasn't sure where the odd-pitched noise came from, but it pierced through her agonizing pain, giving her sudden focus. She tried calming herself, talking aloud as if it would help her frightened state of mind to slow her quick breathing. The high-pitched squeal lulled her concentration away from everything else except the tone. It was fading, slowly morphing into a slowing but rhythmic string of clicks. A pattern with cadence became weaker and slower. She knew she was going to go black any minute. And then she was out. The wheel mounted between the bent front forks of the Harley FLH slowly wound down, momentum losing its battle to keep spinning as the bike lay in a crumpled mass of metal and splintered wood. The steel skeleton mortally wounded near the tree it had just made fatal contact with. A large owl with a massive wingspan had just dropped from a limb overhanging the highway, flying into Travis's neck and shoulder as he and Joey leaned tightly into the hairpin corner. The bird's contact forced Travis to veer onto the shoulder, making his Harley's tires skid out of control in the loose gravel before hitting the unavoidable hole in the asphalt. The sudden slime jar caused the bike to shoot off the highway, becoming airborne into the tree-lined forest that made the road such a beautiful ride. Both Travis and Joey were thrown after careening into the tree trunk some 20 feet down the embankment from the road's edge. The large, dark-winged fowl was now twisted into the metal mess. Blood, goo, and feathers now smeared all over the chrome and crumpled black shiny painted pride and joy. Joey lay unconscious several feet to the right from where she was thrown. The motorcycle, just behind her body, which lay somewhat hidden in the grass and brush. Her fiancé Travis's limp body lay decapitated, his head having been rolled several feet away and now rested against a brown boulder. Travis's oddly perched face lay bloody and battered, his eyes frozen open in a blank hollowness while his stare gazed back as if he were looking into the world from another dimension. Thick, long black hair on the now detached skull was covered with dirt and pine needles, making it an odd, eclectic mix of things melded together that don't belong as one. An eerie sight that would certainly haunt anyone upon walking up and witnessing the macabre scene. His body lay several feet back, twisted into a form no human should ever be found. He had obviously died instantly, most likely never realizing what happened. The twisty mountain road was not usually well traveled, but fortunately for Joey, who still lay broken but alive, an old man in a pickup truck not far behind them witnessed the entire accident. He immediately dialed 911. Help arrived just in time to save the young blonde-haired, blue-eyed woman from bleeding out. She had sustained massive fractures and contusions, leading her to code 3 times before the ambulance arrived at the Redwood Memorial Hospital emergency room, southwest of San Jose in Santa Cruz. Joey would live, but her real battle now lies ahead. A long and continuous war of overcoming and conquering the hidden enemy lying within, patiently in wait, to live again and hunt. Chapter 1. Joey, 4 years after the accident. Life was no longer easy. I often wondered what I'd done to piss off the big man upstairs. I'd suffered through 11 surgeries in just over 4 years since the late afternoon ride that not only stole my lover and future, but was still trying to steal my desire to live through recovery. The very word, recovery, makes me laugh. Does one ever really recover from a fucking life-stealing event like the one I was given? I still had more surgeries to go through. The only thing I now looked forward to was the measured pain of receiving new inked artwork that aided in covering the ugly memories of surgical markings left deep in my body from the surgeons. At least the pain of being tattooed was something I held control over. I got to choose when, where, and what was to be stippled into my skin instead of some surgeon's knife leaving a trail of tissue unnaturally sewn back together. Yes, I held resentment. My life had been going perfect. I was gorgeous and had a great guy who loved and cared for me. Great rides together all over California and Oregon, wherever we damn well wanted to go. Travis held a great job which afforded us to do anything we wanted. And then one goddamned western screech owl protected under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act? and my life and future vanished, gone in an instant. And to think I love nature, birds, reptiles, and I love everything natural. But no longer any fucking owls. Those goddamn creatures can burn in hell. I am alive, though, and I'm strong-willed. I'm no fucking quitter. I survived for a reason. Travis, I miss you, babe. You were a good man, and I will see you again and ride that ride together forever. I thought to myself as I lifted my highball glass of Jameson on the rocks to the framed picture of the two of us on his scooter named Blackie. A tinge of pain began in the crook of my neck and shot down my arm. It was as if the devil were needling me of what he had stolen away, but no broken neck or spine injuries could stop me now. Recovery? Fuck it. I'm on a mission now. No need to be upset at the guys at work for calling me a cyborg. I've been recreated and tweaked for a purpose. I just needed to find out what that purpose is. After dialing Royal Ink, I asked for Matt, my tattooist. Hey Matty, what's up? Yeah, I think my scar can handle it now. You know I need the ink pain for therapy, right? I smiled as he chuckled. You've already done about 60% of my body and I've never so much as flinched or cried like a little bitch yet. You know I can handle it. Okay, next Friday it is. See you then, sweetheart. I pulled my tank top up, revealing yet another surgical scar. I looked at Matt as he studied the long, rough patchwork on my side. Damn, Joey. Matt ran his fingers over the spot of the latest incision. I think you're in for some real therapeutic, discomfort here. Ribs are a bit touchy. I know you're one tough ninja warrior, but if this sketch of your quote is what you are wanting, what doesn't kill me only makes me stronger, he continued to lightly trail his fingers back and forth over the long scar tissue. This one may make it difficult for you to prove that tough ninja shit. All solid dark blacks and grays, huh? You are either very brave or very self-penitent. Give me your darkest ink, Matty. No quote ever fit truer with me than this one, sweetie. You are a different brand of woman, Joey. Your daddy named you right, Miss Tommy Boy. Mac grinned an evil grin. Damn straight, Matty. You can't be a girly girl when your daddy names you Joey. Kind of like Johnny Cash and a boy named Sue. How do you do? Now, you're gonna die. Joey smiled a huge grin before the two busted into laughter. I knew Matt shouldn't have been amazed when I sat through the 6-hour session without batting an eye or squeezing back a tear. He knew I was one tough cookie, and I knew he appreciated that. Crying, puking girly girls were not exactly welcome in his shop. That's why the sign over his chair boldly read, "Hike up your big girl undies and shut the fuck up." I stood in front of the mirror admiring yet another addition to the visual story of my journey. Yep, part of the recovery process. I knew my daddy was looking down on me with a smile of self-pride. After all, he had made me who I was, and this world wasn't even close to tough enough to break me. Not today, not tomorrow, never. Semper Fidelis. Always faithful. Chapter 2. Dreams and Aberration. Waking up and sensing it was still dark outside, I felt an awkward feeling of a stalking nature. Not as if I were the one being hunted, but the tension and anxiety of being the lurker or shadow in the darkness. One part of me felt ashamed or contrite for this odd feeling, yet on the flip side, I felt pride in my stealth and awareness of my prey. My heart was racing. I could feel the pulse in my fingertips. I felt power. I found this sensation exhilarating, yet very awkward and uncomfortable for some reason. Who or what had I been stalking? In my dream, I'd felt myself breathing in mechanical rhythms as if my body were growling a low, inaudible purr of anticipated exhilaration. I was like an animal with the hunger for another's lifeblood, inquisitive of the urge to kill. not out of any need or self-preservation, but for one of pleasure and discovery. I laid as still as a deer, much like my eyesight locked into the headlights of a vehicle careening at me in a high rate of speed. I've never felt this way before. Never. Nary a flinch from a muscle. For the first time in my life, through all the hardship and tragedy I've endured, I feel something inside I've never experienced before. True fear. I felt its danger. I felt dangerous. Granted, it is mixed with an overwhelming taste of intense excitement, but fear is a definite strain within this new emotion I had never dealt with. My senses homed in. I heard things clearer with focus, and my visual sight held more definition. I was like a cat. Not some lazy fat house cat, but a leopard or panther. A sensation of being predatorial. I could smell a cologne I'd not recognized. It wasn't eternity. That was Travis's signature scent that always heightened my sexual desires. This aroma was something more arrogant. It was almost assaulting in the way it infiltrated my nostrils. It was pissing me the fuck off, filling me with an agitated anger not present mere seconds ago. My eyes sharpened, and the dark silhouette that moments earlier was hidden in the shadows now stood out as if I were wearing military-grade night vision goggles. This figure now cleared into a legible face. He was a handsome young man. I don't know why or what made that thought pop into my mind, but it did, and I couldn't tuck it back into the recess of the drawer inside my mind. The sentence rolled across my mental tongue as clear as glass. It's too bad I must stab the life out of such a cute young college boy. And mentally, that is exactly what I did. Of course, I played with the internal picture of the act inside my brain like a cat would toy with a helpless trapped rodent. He was easily lured into a false sense of security by my hot, moist, and fleshy body. I almost felt bad he never saw it coming. He was so anxious to get me naked and romp, he never optioned in his young mind that a female such as me could be a dangerous and fatal threat. A Trojan horse hiding within a woman that harbored needs of stealing life from a man. Not his possessions, but his life itself. The act of doing so had been beautiful, but hideous all at once. The bed, now splattered with collecting pools of the crimson-red liquid that moments earlier sustained Josh's life, now left his eyes silently stilled to an uncontrolled quiver as life slipped from his body. He hadn't owned enough time to show a look of fright. Just as his face shined full of the pleasure that I was giving him, my fingers reached for the blade stashed in the sheets wadded up behind me. I went crazy, energetic, and wild as I slashed at him with the steel-serrated blade. The thump of the bass from the song blasting from his stereo charged me with the rhythm I stabbed at his heart. The act felt like I imagined a famous painter would enjoy as he wielded his painter's brush, bristles full of the bright red paint as it sliced through the air, artistically filling the white canvas with broad strokes of his blood-red anguish. When my painting was finished, I collapsed, void of all the energy seconds earlier controlled me. Now completely spent, breathing heavily and working at comprehending what I had just done. I moved in close and looked into his open eyes as they stared back empty but wide open for me to inspect. Void of life, yet a tiny gleam of the hallway sconce's light reflecting brightly in his now dark and dead pupils. Fuck! What had I done? Confused, my lips, which formed a straight line of shock and question, suddenly turned up into a Cheshire cat's grin. I lifted my aching arched back from the bent-over position I'd been sitting on him in. I took a moment to admire my first work of art, smearing the fresh blood against my thighs and palms. As I leaned forward, his manhood fell away from me, and I took note of the awareness. A fucking masterpiece. I knew instantly I would have to paint again. A new thirst that could only be quenched by replication leading to perfection. I climbed off my victim's now flaccid, moist body and rolled over onto my back. I attempted to relive the moment as if I could hit rewind on a VCR and then push play, but instead my eyes slid up under my eyelids, too empty to complete the thought. I laid still like that deer in headlights beside the cooling body I'd just ravaged and then stolen its life without hesitation nor reason. I quietly fell into the deepest and pain-free sleep I'd enjoyed in a long, long time. Recovery was coming along grandly. Chapter 3. Waking Up Emotions of Consequence. My bedroom window was positioned where the rising sun filled its glass pane every morning. The curtains were light and airy enough to quell the harshness of its brightest beams without entirely blocking the early rays allowed in to wake me with casual brightening light. After all, I held no real schedule anymore. The surgeries and recovery times now robbed me of my job. Thankfully, my father had not only raised me to be strong and fit to care for myself, but he had also left a gracious life insurance payoff. My schedule was now reduced to recouping from one surgery until the next, tattoo therapy from my artist Maddie in between, and being hospitable to those in the neighborhood who were less fortunate than I. Watching crime TV at any hour I wanted was almost always on my schedule of killing time. Killing time. I laughed at my thought and use of the phrase. I brushed the night crust from my eyes and rolled over to my side, expecting to see Josh's cold, stiff body lying beside me. No panic within, just realizing in the moment that I had made no plan of how to dispose of his body. I looked over with slight hesitation. My mouth suddenly fell open without refrain. Where the fuck was his body? Chapter 4. Internal Nagging Questions. Have you ever thought or wondered for the slightest of a second that maybe, just maybe, something foreign was inside your body? Something that in some way entered your bloodstream undetected and then began invading, attempting to orchestrate a coup, dissecting your defenses and interpreting your responses so it could counter your reactions? Something that doesn't belong nor fit with your previous, I don't know, thoughts and insides? Some would say I've introduced foreign substance into my body in the form of poisonous inks every time I come out of royal ink. They would argue Matt's artwork inlaid just under the surface of my skin is a voluntary risk of foreign invasion. While this may be true, I don't believe the colored inks could slowly overtake my thoughts and render me powerless in the decisions I attempt to make. To that, I call BS. They are just appended in the choices I make. I used to think that just one tat would be all I'd ever want. I could have been satisfied with that first little Irish knotted cross on my ankle, thinking it would suffice my inquisitiveness of the process. But that was before going countless operations to put my broken body back together. Before the memories that those deep wounding scars kept reminding me of, goading me into recollections of how broken I quickly became after what I'd lost in the flutter of that fucking owl's flight into our path. I need the ink to help hide those memories so I can rebuild myself to the woman I once was, the one I long to be again. An existence without people seeing my torn and re-sewn flesh. Scars that lead them to ask stupid questions. It's my battle, goddammit, not yours. None of your prying business. Get in my way and I'll make damn sure you live to regret it. Don't tread on me or mine. I fell back into the chair. I don't know where this rising steam comes from anymore. I was once very peaceful, filled with love and wonder of the world around me. Now I fight despising it. Something is inside me and taking residence within, invading my defenses, attempting to conquer what was once mine, stealing pieces of me bit by bit. My power, my desires. I sat up straight, finding myself gasping for the air that normally came easy to breathe in naturally. If I could just chill the hell out. What is happening to me? I question myself. Who am I morphing into? This is not who I am, not what I want. I yell aloud at the top of my lungs while I search the mirror hanging on the wall at the foot of my bed. Instantly, tears blur my vision of myself. The colors of the artwork covering my body begin to swallow the image of the girl that is staring back at me. It's as if I now am merely the screen to display a moving picture reel. I remember a phrase my grandma used to tell me when she suffered pain or distress from some tragedy she faced. She would look into the heavens outside from the front porch. The swing she sat on would sway back and forth to a melody only she could hear. My sweet grandma would shake her head and repeat the same quote over and over. Lord God Almighty, this too shall pass. This too shall pass. I believed her. After all, my grandma never told a lie for as long as she lived. She wasn't capable of it. But today, as I sit in my bed staring at myself, trying to picture myself at that tender young age, the age she would see me as way back then, I believe I'm the exception that broke the rule. I don't feel this strange internal war against my soul will ever pass. It's too raging. I'm afraid my soul will instead be crucified, burnt at the stake like Joan of Arc, the painful flames licking at the soles of my feet as I cry out for mercy. And at the weakest moment, I'm engulfed in this pathetic pity party. That ruthless fucking Cheshire cat grin begins turning up at each corner of my mouth. Yes, whatever is inside me was back, and I hold no control over it. But then again, a minute later, I don't care. All I want is to satisfy its hunger once more. But this time, for real. Not just in the imagination given to me as I sleep. I feel the hunger and desire to experience the intensity and taste the salt of another human's blood. Feed the invader's desire to witness the carnage I am capable of. I hold no clue where this entity within has come from, but I kneel in submission. Tonight, the hunt will begin. My heart unrelentingly rages once more with the anticipation equal to the hunger of the masses starving within a third world country. Their collective agony of awaiting the day's rations to quell those pangs of hunger one moment longer. The crazy thing, last week, I felt none of this. That's how quick this thing has swallowed me up. I'm like Jonah and the whale. The only difference, I have no idea what the fuck this internal whale is. This alien that has engulfed me and made me theirs. Chapter 5. Reflections. I miss you, Travis. I took flowers to your gravesite today. Travis Dean Tallyman. His name rolled off my tongue nicely. Joey Ray Tallyman does too. Of course, Travis always wanted to call me Joy Ray. I never asked why, but instead told him, honey, I only answer to the name my daddy gave me, and Joy Ray ain't it. And then I'd laugh. His dark brown eyes would twinkle with a hint of mischief before he'd follow up with, Joey, I'd call you Mary Mother of Jesus if I knew you'd always be mine, sweetheart. You own me, baby doll. Lock, stock, and the junk below. Then he laughed with a hint of redness in his cheeks. He was tough, but he was sensitive. In a Travis-only kind of way. I knew I just missed him. There will never be another like him. All the babes adored him at the club. Hell, all his biker brothers did too. All the way up until you crossed him. Then watch the fuck out. He never hurt me though. I don't think he had it in him. But he damn sure knew I'd be gone if he did. I don't put up with that shit and I let him know. I told him, Travis, you ever feel the urge to hurt a lady, you best fucking knock on some other lady's door and not mine. I'll kick your ass and crap down your throat. And you know I will. He'd smile big and respond, I know it, Joey. A line I'd never cross. Love you, baby doll. It's funny the little memories that flood back to mind when you lose someone you never expected to lose. I laid in that hospital for 6 months, fading in and out of comas, both natural and induced, without knowing my world had been stolen from me. I laid there every night and day with Travis as if he were truly there beside me. Sometimes now I think he really was, like maybe Jesus allowed him to temporarily stay back with me until I snapped out of things. But is that possible? Or maybe he laid claim to his soul that afternoon as the demon, in the form of that owl, stole him away from me? I'll never know until we hook up again. I hope that's where he is, with Jesus. 'Cause someday I want to see him again, and I know that's where I'm going in the end. It's important to me. We never got to say goodbye, and while that wouldn't change a thing, it's that final goodbye that robs me of closure. It's why I can't empty his drawers in my dresser or take his leather jacket down from the hook on the wall by the back door. That framed picture of him and I on Blackie, our Harley. His last crystal highball glass still sits on the table beside his chair. I won't allow myself to wipe away anything that has ties to him. It's all I own to hold on to my sanity. I laughed out loud. As if this is sanity, I thought to myself. I suddenly felt the bone-stirring pain in my neck once again as it traveled down my body, reaching down into my arms. It comes from nowhere and without warning. Bucking owl demon? Seems he is always just seconds away, as if sitting on a tree limb, just waiting to swoop back down and finish his task of destroying my soul. Damn these memories. There I go, attempting to let them bed back down in my head and make me weak. I despise any sign of fragility in myself, in my bones, my body, and especially my mind. Drowning in self-pity does nothing but brew more powerlessness. This too shall pass. Chapter 6. Virgin Artwork. The Score, Travis My Old Bar, an eclectic mix of locals and tourists. Tonight, it held only 2 open seats at the bar top. The one on the left was next to some fat Sam touristy-looking slob, but sitting at the opposite end of the bar was a young, smooth, athletic type. He could be a physical challenge as he looked fairly buff. Maybe a college football jock or baseball player. God's gift to women with the wavy blondish brown hair and short stubbled beard. If he has green eyes, he's going to be my first prey. My first real kill. Not sure why I now find green eyes revolting, but I do. Maybe because that was the first color I saw after the accident. Trees with green swallowing up my world and spitting it back out with pain. I ponied up to the bar and intentionally bumped his chair with the one I was pulling out. "Sorry, is this seat taken?" I asked as I smiled and batted my eyes. He turned to me quickly at first, as if he were annoyed to have his attention drawn away from the game on the television. When our eyes met, his attitude quickly changed. Yep, bright green, the green of redwoods in the Santa Cruz Mountains. You poor asshole. You just had to own those plush green eyes. I squeezed my rounded ass in between him and the chair, rubbing it against him before hoisting myself up onto the seat. It was almost too far from the bar for me to reach. "Excuse me, gorgeous, I'll help you with that." He scooted his bar stool out and stood, as if returning my action. His crotch purposely brushed up against my leg as he needled his way out and helped scoop my stool closer to the bar. "Why, thank you, A couple of seconds passed. Your name?" Cole Riley, and you're welcome anytime. You here alone tonight?" he asked before he turned back to the game as if he were trying to play it cool. A move that lasted less time than it takes a horny dog to begin humping your leg. He turned back and asked, "What are you drinking tonight? I'll order you one." My first, I thought, and laughed internally. Hell, I could suck his wallet dry and empty his card by the time the bar closed tonight if I wanted. I knew his kind. Hell, before Travis, I dated his kind. For a minute, I had another thought. It came from out of left field and deep. Why am I being such a bitch? This isn't who I am. I'm becoming one of those girls I despise. Back to the recent school of thought. I was indeed changing inside, morphing into everything I hated in others. I instantly smelled his cologne. Musky, yet slightly sweet overtones. My mouth watered for the salty metallic taste of blood. His blood. My mind instantly lost any other insignificant thoughts other than attaining my craving. Jameson, please, on the rocks. Even though my thoughts were scattered tonight, I easily seduced Cole and let him know I was going to rock his world tonight. I even gave him a hint of what was yet to come. I'm going to paint you red with your heart pumping out pulses of lust-filled blood. Poor Cole took no heed of my hidden warning. He was too full of the testosterone-induced daydreams of what he was going to get tonight when we got to his house to fully understand. He was truly going to diet tonight in a bright red terror-stricken painting of his own blood. He'd be found tomorrow, lying on his blood-stained canvas of stark white sheets, smeared and stained with his story of seduction and departure. His eyes fixed in a dead stare at the spot that was filled with me, stabbing the life from him as he lay confused and dying. For me, I'd just slip out after my work was done, leaving my artwork behind as a display of the horror now alive and well within Santa Cruz. A chilling virgin masterpiece of what would soon become a roving gallery filled with chilling pieces of my capabilities. Photos would adorn the walls of baffled investigators, while news spots across television screens and headlines would drive fear and morbid curiosity. My new life given to escape the pains of recovery and re-enter the world in new fashion. Cole fumbled with his keys at the front door. He dropped them twice before I reached around and held his fingers in mine as we both inserted the tip of the key into the slot. Leaning in, I breathed a short sigh of sexual exhilaration into his ear. The door quickly opened as he twisted our hands holding the key, willingly inviting me in. A move he may soon regret, if I created my painting slow enough to allow him to enjoy his victory inside of me before snuffing out his existence. Cole stumbled over to his bar, offering me a drink. I nodded in agreement as I began twisting the buttons on my blouse, poking them through the tiny holes, slowly revealing the inkwork scribed into the skin covering my breasts. His eyes widened with anticipation. "So, are you tattooed over your entire body?" he asked in a voice slightly slurred and inquisitive. "Why, yes I am, Cole. Do you like them?" I asked seductively as I opened my blouse and began removing it from my arched back. "They tell my complete journey up to this point. Do you want to see that story?" "Yes," he answered almost immediately as he turned to face me, spilling bourbon from the bottle as he unintentionally pulled the bottle's neck away from the glass's edge. "Oops," he smiled. "I've never, made love to a woman with tattoos all over her body. I'm ready to see what it's like, though." Slightly offended by his candor, stating he would like to see what it was like, made my thought about the choice I had made. Now reassured I'd been correct. I was going to enjoy making him my first kill, and how it was going to feel. It was going to be rewarding. I set my glass back onto the table without even tasting its contents. I wouldn't call what we're going to do making love. We're going to fuck, and I don't need anything else to fill me but what you already have down here. My hand traveled quickly south to the overly excited part of his body. Cole fumbled, attempting to set his glass and bottle of Jameson back onto the tabletop. Both toppled to their sides and began spilling over the table's edge, but he barely took notice of the mess as I wiggled my hips, shaking my skirt down around my ankles. The race to his bedroom was furious, caution thrown to the wind, our clothes scattered in a trail from the bar stools in his living room to the bed overlooking the lit boardwalk. Cole never noticed me sliding the stiletto under the pillow. His attentions on watching the artwork dance across my naked flesh was too titillating for his eyes to look away. I almost felt bad for him. The entire act so far was like shooting ducks in a pond. It was amazing how close to my dream this event was playing out. His body was chiseled, and I must admit I enjoyed the sensations he was providing me. It had been so long since I'd been with someone. It felt like a shame to end it, but I rolled him over onto his back and slowly crawled on top, grinding my pelvis against his. As he entered me, I began the dream dance while my arms stretched out forward toward his pillows, fingers of my right hand searching for what would be used as my paintbrush in his creative end. Our bodies heaved with an intensity I'm not certain I've ever felt as I leaned farther forward, my breasts pushing against his face. My fingers continued to reach for the hidden blade. It was over so fast. I don't believe Cole felt a thing after the third or fourth puncture into his chest. His head fell back onto his pillow, and as I rolled off him, the words I'd spoken became truth. His heart truly spurted out streams of warm red blood in slowing pulses. His gaze became hollowed, and the shock and fear quietly slipped away into a calm vacancy. a few fading wisps of breath being vanquished from his lungs, and he was gone. The actual kill had ended too quickly and abruptly to fill my new much-expected sensations. I would need to learn to pace myself in the future. As I put my clothing back on and gathered my things, I walked back to the bed and surveyed my first painting I was about to leave behind. A feeling of disappointment washed over me as I stared at the growing red pool of blood soaking into the white cotton sheets. I'd held no previous knowledge of how much blood a body held. I now knew it was quite a bit as I contemplated my act and the force that had come over me to complete it. The oddness of the moment was that as I looked into Cole's eyes, which seemed to stare blankly at the ceiling without expression, I suddenly saw Travis's face, and he smiled at me. I believed it was only inside my head or somehow echoing throughout my body, but I swear I heard his voice as it spoke to me. "It gets better, babe. Next time, do a woman. Just for me, baby doll." My first reaction was a sharp pain in my gut followed by the need to retch, but I turned and walked out through Cole's door, and by the time it quietly closed, I'd warmed up to the idea. Was the alien I suspected was inside of me Travis? A side of Travis I never knew? Chapter 7. Adding to the Gallery. It's amazing that the phrase, "practice makes perfect," is so true. I was becoming quite proficient and causing a new sensation of fear throughout the Santa Cruz area in a very short time. The authorities couldn't understand what had taken over their town so quickly. A madman or a team of home invaders. There were no profilers able to come up with a typical outline of a suspect that fit each crime scene they now were investigating. Of course, there was also the fact I myself could not formulate what was happening either. I didn't know what was driving me into this new hunger I'd become a part of. Physically, I shouldn't be able to have the strength. Mentally, I couldn't begin to explain what was going on inside my head. Travis's voice became stronger inside my brain or soul, but I couldn't fathom why. How did he fit into this chaotic craziness? Was this me acting out because I blamed him for not being here? Or for the accident? It was that damned owl's fault. I soon began leaving an image of an owl brushed on the wall with blood using a small paintbrush. I wasn't sure why, but it did create quite a stir with the cops and media. It threw another question other than the fact both men and women were being found murdered in their beds. Now there was hand-painted images of owls being left on the victims' walls. I finally believed I was on track to finding out something that may help explain things. I'd visited my doctor, and for the first time I asked a question that seemed to hit the nail on the head. "So, Doc, I feel pretty good physically, at least. You know, most of the time. Better than I ever believed possible for sure." My mind was fighting inside with not letting too much information escape my lips. I wasn't certain I should tell him just how physical I could become at times. The broken and repaired nerves and bones would also help with any alibi I may ever need to call upon if my prints or something were ever matched at a scene. After all, I'm the helpless, wounded, and crippled woman who survived the decapitation of her fiancé in a horrible and traumatic motorcycle accident several years back. What better cover could one have? And the scars and medical records to prove it. But I'm wondering, I have a question, Doc. "Yes, Joey, ask away. I'll tell you whatever I can in a straightforward fashion. You know that to be true. I haven't pulled any punches up to this point, no matter how painfully true they may be or answers you don't want to hear." "I know, Doc Peterson, and that's why I feel like I can ask you this." I paused, searching for careful wording. "Do you believe there could be some kind of alien, not an alien like from outer space, but alien matter as not normally belonging?" "Joey, I think I'm sensing what you are trying to ask. It's the one subject I have been troubled about telling you, especially since you are so close, or I should say, we're so close to Travis. I thought better of letting you know until I felt you may be mentally ready to hear what I'm about to tell you. Okay, Doc, I have to say I'm almost afraid now to hear what you have to say. Don't be, Joey. It's not a bad thing. It's what's kept you alive and from suffering even more. Doc, you're not going to tell me that I've been a part of some sort of biological experiment, are you? Where I've been recreated in some clandestine lab or something, and now you need me to carry out contracts, are you? I asked hesitantly, but with a slight sense of humor to cover up my sudden discomfort from the topic. After all, I've seen the movies where shit like this happened. Was it real, though? I laughed, but questioned semi-seriously. I am still all human, aren't I? No monkey parts or... No, Joey. Nothing like that at all. Dr. Peterson smiled, followed by a short guffaw. The procedure used on you has been done many times before, for quite a while. It's called a cadaver bone transplant. He hesitated a moment and watched me. I presumed to get my reaction before he would continue. I smiled, but honestly, I was beginning to become concerned. Did I have a killer's bone in biology inside of me? Could this be what was causing these desires to kill people invade my mind to a point I'd lost control of myself and was enjoying it? It's really a simple and effective procedure, Joey. You see, we take the bone chips of a donor that matches blood type and biological makeup, and we build a cage around the fractured or destroyed bone in the patient's body. We then fill the cage with the matched bone chips and let them meld and grow into the patient's natural tendency to heal itself. The cadaver donor's bones help strengthen and fill in where your bone makeup wouldn't suffice. It then becomes a rather symbiotic mating, meaning the patient needs the cadaver's bone makeup and material to fully heal to its best possible outcome, while the cadaver's bones need the nutrients and things that the patient's body creates to maintain surviving and growing new bone. It's a perfect marriage of a rather simple solution to a complex problem when so much bone and density is destroyed in a patient. It not only speeds recovery time, but strengthens the patient's new bone growth density with the attributes of the donor's bone material. I literally sat in the chair dumbfounded. That's of course boiled down to the simplest layman's terms that I can come up with in a moment's notice. The fact is, finding a donor that works is many times the most difficult part of the equation to overcome. Many times, so Doc, let me get this straight. I have someone else's bone matter inside me, making my bones heal and become stronger than if they weren't available and inside me? Simple answer, yes, Joey. If we had been unable to have found a matching donor so quickly, you would more than likely not have been able to walk in here today on your own accord. It would have taken much more time if it were even possible at all. I believe the donor's bone literally saved your life and improved the quality of such that you are now living. So, have there ever been any complications or added surprises or things that weren't expected? I know it's a crazy question, but are you talking something like taking on some of the donor's traits or abilities? Habits? That's exactly what I'm asking, Doc. I felt very different lately. Like maybe there is something alien inside me. Again, no seed pods or anything like that. Just, I know I sound crazy, but I've heard of a case or two in the past. Patients claiming that they feel those sensations too. Like they have new character traits that didn't exist before, but in my professional opinion, I don't believe that to be possible. Not for a minute. Not physically possible. Now there may be the possibility your mind is playing tricks, so to say, with you, or you perhaps are reading things into non-existent issues, maybe not seeing coincidence as just that, possibly. Am I able to know who my donor was so I could thank their family? Joey, usually that is up to the family to say if they want the recipient to know who donated. But in this case, there was no family we were able to contact for permission. Only the donor's signature on the back of their driver's license. And that is what has kept me from letting you in on the who until you yourself asked. Who, Doc? Whose bones are inside my body? Who is responsible for saving me? I think you should probably sit down before we talk. Chapter 8. A flood of questions. I couldn't think. The off-white walls began closing in around me. Claustrophobia was new to me, but I sensed that must be what I was feeling. I instantly felt too much overwhelming emotion along with a multitude of new questions filling my brain. I was mentally drowning. My coping mechanism was being triggered. I'd been experiencing internal battles for several months. Hell, several years since the accident. But now the inside of my head was the battlefront in a war I knew nothing of survival. The demilitarized zone was in the rearview mirror, but I had no intentions of backtracking to any safe zone no matter what happened from this point on. I was just told in not so many words that the spoils of my existing war so far were mere trophies given to me by my true love through the gift of his cadaver bone chips. It was his battles of the hunt I had taken over, but I had held no idea of the activities he was into before now. Travis had somehow kept his dark secret of killing for fun from me. I was now just a mere extension of the sickness he had harbored covertly through the transfer from his bones to mine. As I sat in the now cold and stark doctor's office, my brain attempted to decipher the information I had just received. I was shocked. I was angry with Travis for doing what he was doing while he claimed to love only me. I was pissed at Doc Peterson for not telling me this now damning information, but for using Travis's fucking cadaver bone to begin with. My life had been a roller coaster since the wreck, and I think now I'd rather be homebound and crippled, free from this new curse, rather than to have succumbed to it and lost my power of choice. And then I felt it coming. It was as if my internal thoughts of conflict had awoken the beast within. I tried to fight the feeling washing across my face as I prayed Doc would be looking away as the smile roared in like the incoming tide. My lips quickly began their trek, defeating my will to refrain from the widening and stretching of my face until my entire mouth full of teeth stuck out. My giveaway, my tell, my Cheshire cat grin, pearly whites shining like a troupe of bright white Broadway dancers stretched out across center stage with bright lights drawing attention. I quickly turned and ducked my head to cover up the unwelcome and maddening smile. "Joey, are you okay?" Doc Peterson asked as he attempted to survey the look as it washed over my face. "I'm fine, Dr. Peterson," I quickly spit out. "My body is healing at a faster pace each day. I'm glad to hear I was able to retain a small bit of Travis to keep with me, like a memento or tribute." I forced the repugnant smile to withdraw slightly, and now know he didn't just leave me without being able to take care of me the only way he was able to. I allowed my smile to show just a little. The grin was just a reaction from a memory I recalled, a moment we shared together a long, long time ago. In fact, it was an entire lifetime ago. It'll take some time for everything to settle in and gel within my little world, my psyche. As you certainly know by now, I'm ninja strong. I'm nobody's little bitch. My father saw to teaching me that before he left this cruel world. I reckon I'll be carrying on his tradition along with a little of my much-loved Travis's from now on. Thank you, Dr. Peterson. I'll see you next checkup, right? I winked along with my damned smile. I'm feeling good enough that I believe I could even ride occasionally. Dr. Peterson looked up from the chart in his hand. "Now, Joey, don't be getting too far ahead of yourself. While I'm a firm believer of getting back on the horse eventually." I smiled and laughed. "Oh, I'm not climbing on the biggest horse. Maybe start out with a little Sportster and work my way up." The spot of my neck began its burn and slow movement down to my arms. It was the sign the hunt would soon be calling my name again. Now, instead of just some vacant, unexplainable desire within my soul, calling me to kill, I was now able to attach a name to it, and I quietly whispered aloud just under my breath, "It's okay, Travis. I'll see you tonight. We'll shred one together. This time, you pick her out." I could feel the continued burn in my cheeks as my smile grew wider once more. The Cheshire Panther was clawing at my soul, hungry for a prowl through the Santa Cruz nightlife. Somewhere tonight, I'd be painting a bedroom crimson red, adding another work of art to my roving gallery along with a bloody sketch of an owl in flight. It would be a real newsworthy killer of a story for the morning or afternoon news. The boardwalk lights seemed extra bright while the bar traffic heavier than normal. My eyes darted back and forth in search of my desire. Across the pier, a beautiful brunette drew the lighter to her cigarette. The flick of the steel against the flint brought the flame dancing in the green pools of her irises. I heard his inner voice inside my soul. "That's the one, Joey. I can see it now." I nodded to Travis as if he were standing near me and spoke in a whisper as I slowly walked across the wooden planks to make my move. "This one's for you, baby doll. I hope you enjoy my work." The woman's lighter flickered before dying out, unable to relight as she rolled the small steel wheel across the flint again. I pulled the Zippo from my jeans pocket, flipping the lid open and running it up my leg until the flame came alive all in one fluid motion. I lifted it to the tip of her cigarette and said, "Your lucky night, honey. I'm a sucker for green eyes. What's your name?" "Sasha Kingsley. What's yours?" "Joey Ray." I smiled, showing my perfect teeth. "Great night for drink, don't you think?" "Well, Joey Ray, I never say no to a Jameson. I just happen to know a sweet little dive where we can get a couple of those. And I know a place we could maybe end up tonight after closing time." "Sweet. I could use some company tonight. Do you like paintings? I have a gallery of my own that your likeness would fit perfectly."
Chilling tales for dark nights.